Are you interested in learning more about 13th chords and how to use them in your music? In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into 3 different types of 13th chords: major 13th, minor 13th, and dominant 13th. You just heard a C major 13th chord. Major 13th chords are written in notation with the letters M-A-J and the number 13 after the chord letter. The next chord that we'll play is the C minor 13th chord. Minor 13th chords are written in notation with a small m and the number 13 after the chord letter. Finally, let's listen to the C dominant 13th chord, also known simply as the 13 chord. This chord is written with the number 13 after the letter name. Now you might be asking, how do I construct these 13th chords? Major 13th chords are built off of the major scale and include the following scale degrees: root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th. Minor 13th chords include the following scale degrees: root, flat or minor 3rd, 5th, flat or minor 7th, 9th, 11th, 13th. And dominant 13th chords include the following scale degrees: root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th. Let's look at some examples to clarify this. The C major scale has the following notes: C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. The first note is C, third note is E, and fifth note is G. These notes create a C major chord. Add the 7th note B to this and you get a C major 7th chord. If I continue the scale after the 7th note B, then the notes simply repeat again. This second set of notes is an octave higher than the first set of notes. So if I assign a number to each note, you can see that although the letters repeat, the numbers continue to rise to indicate this higher pitch. The 9th note D is the same as the second note. Add this to the C major 7th chord and you get a C major 9th chord. 11th note F is the same as the 4th note. Add this to the C major 9th chord and you get a C major 11th chord. And finally, the 13th note A is the same as the 6th note. Add this to the C major 11th chord and you get a C major 13th chord. So to confirm, the C major 13th chord has 7 notes: C, E, G, B, D, F, and A. This is not a mistake, it is every note in the C major scale. Despite its dense nature, this chord has a bright, happy sound due to the major 3rd and the major 7th scale degrees. Let's now explore the C minor 13th chord. Here's the C major scale again. You use the same process I demonstrated earlier to build the chords. So start on the root note, skip a note to the 3rd note, and then skip another note to the 5th note. The difference with minor chords is the 3rd note. It becomes a flat or minor 3rd. This is indicated with the flat symbol. A flat note is half a step or semitone below the standard note. Therefore, in this example, C minor would have the notes C, E flat, and G. If you add the flat 7th note B flat to the C minor triad, then you get a C minor 7th chord with the notes C, E flat, G, and B flat. I'll show you how the C minor 13th chord is constructed. This process is similar to what you've learnt about the major 13th chord, so I won't go into detail about the 9th and 11th chords here. This ultimately gives you a C minor 13th chord with the notes C, E flat, G, B flat, D, F, and A. This chord has a more sombre, melancholy sound due to the minor 3rd and the minor 7th scale degrees. Finally, it's the C13 chord. If you take the C major 13th chord but use the flat 7th note we saw in the minor 13th chord, you get the notes C, E, G, B flat, D, F, and A. This chord has a tense, dissonant sound due to the flat 7th scale degree combined with the 3rd scale degree. You can experiment with substituting 13th chords anywhere in your own chord progressions to add some extra complexity and interest to your music. When used diatonically, that is strictly in a key, then the major 13th chord can feature as the 1 chord, the minor 13th can be the 2 chord, and the dominant 13th can be used as the 5 chord in major keys. In natural minor/Aeolian keys, the major 13th chord can be used as the 3 chord, the minor 13th can feature as the 4 chord, and the dominant 13th as the 7 chord. Because they have 7 notes, all of these full 13th chords are impractical to play on most instruments. Because of this and their dense lack of clarity, these chords are rarely used in practice. What you will come across is versions of these chords with one or more of the notes removed. This is in order to make them easier to play and to provide a clearer sound. I won't go into detail about these altered chords in this video. The focus here are the full 7-note 13th chords. I'll show you some examples now using HookPad. There are links in the description if you want to get HookPad and follow along or to learn more. I'll use the key of C major for the examples, but these principles apply to any major key. Here are the chords in the key of C major. You know that the 1 chord can be played as a major 13th, the 2 can be a minor 13th, and the 5 can be a dominant 13th. This gives us C major 13th with the notes C, E, G, B, D, F and A, D minor 13th which has the notes D, F, A, C, E, G and B, and G13 which is constructed with the notes G, B, D, F, A, C and E. You can see that these chords all have the same notes, which are the 7 notes in the C major scale. You might therefore expect them all to sound the same, but have a listen to them in order now. The different root notes and order of the notes stacked above this differentiate the chords from one another. So now you might be asking, how can I use the 13th chords? Basically, they function in the same way as the simpler chords that you've substituted for them. Let's use a popular 1-4-2-5 progression to explore this. In this first version, I'll use the major 13th chord for the 1 chord. Listen to the change this brings to the home chord. Next up, the minor 13th chord will feature as the 2 chord. Listen to how complex and out of place this sounds here without any other altered or extended chords around it. Finally, it's time for the dominant 13th chord in the 5 position. Here it will lead us back to the tonic chord 1. Listen to the tense dissonance that makes the resolution to the 1 chord all the more satisfying. This idea is sometimes used in gospel music. Another way to use dominant 13th chords is as secondary dominants. Check out my video on secondary dominants in the description for more information. If I use the secondary dominant of the 4 chord, it is the same as the 1 chord. If you play this chord as a dominant 7th chord, it provides a strong pull to the 4 chord in order to be resolved. This secondary dominant of the 4 chord also works well when played as a dominant 13th. Listen to this in the following progression. So far the 13th chords have been a bit isolated, but in the next progression I'll use the 3 13th chord types that you have learnt. Listen to how this changes the feel of the entire progression. It also starts on the chord that isn't the 1 chord. This gives the progression a different movement to when we started on the 1 chord. You've learned how to use 13th chords. Now expand your harmony palette even more by watching the altered and extended chord playlist on screen.